Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. I'm delighted to welcome Dessy Levinson, founder and CEO of CREAT, a technology-enabled framework for cognitive and emotional resilience, as our distinguished guest on today's podcast episode. In addition to her leadership at CREAT, Dessy is an executive strategist and relational integration coach, driven by a persistent desire to understand the world and the human in it. Dessy Levinson has a tireless student of narrative, exploring subjects as diverse as psychology, physics, social anthropology, mythology, and market strategy. In this episode, Dessy Levinson will share key insights from her book, From Overwhelm to Flow, Sailing the Seas of Self with Courage, Meaning, and Resilience. So without further delay, let's welcome Dessy to the Business Talk podcast. Dessy, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Thank you so much, Deepak. I am so glad to be here.
Yeah. Dessy, you describe today's world as increasingly overwhelming. What are some of the key reasons why people feel more adrift despite their efforts to control uncertainty?
Have you looked at the news? It is actually when I first wrote the book, the world was normal levels of overwhelming, meaning day to day overwhelming. And now the level of volatility has greatly decreased just in the past, 6 months to a year. I think it's a confluence of things. Most of them are external right now. So very much similar to how in the pandemic there was an actual virus. Right now there is geopolitical uncertainty. There is technologically driven uncertainty as AI escalates and we begin wondering about our jobs and what meaning even is. And then additionally to that, we are these individuals, especially people listening to your podcast, high performing individuals who are constantly driven to succeed. And when it becomes very difficult to know what success even looks like or how we can succeed, the overwhelm just escalates and ratchets up.
Your book challenges the way we perceive intensity and stress. Can you explain how our nervous system actually processes complexity and why traditional stress management techniques often backfire?
Yeah. As I was saying everything, when I answered your first question, I was thinking, oh my God, I hope I'm not stressing everyone who is listening to this right now, because that is exactly how stress works, is we constantly look at the world and try to predict what is going to happen. So our brains are these very much like Bayesian prediction machines. They're constantly computing threat and opportunity and trying to orient toward opportunity and away from threat. When the noise in the external environment is so high that the level of surprise continuously rises. And so with that, that intensity that we perceive becomes embodied. We feel it in our body, our nervous system activates, and we're constantly looking for threat. That gets interpolated and into our body as stress. And then we are cognitively stressed, embodiedly, somatically stressed. And as a result, our emotions tend to be negatively valenced. We get anxious, fearful, angry. All of those are signals in your system that you are under threat.
You introduce the CREAT framework: clarity, regulation, agency, trust, and energy. Could you walk us through each of these elements and how they work together to build resilience?
Um, Yeah, so what I guess the question is, all right, you just walked me through how much stress there is. Now, what on earth do I do about it? And so I set up the Crate framework specifically because of my own stress, because I was feeling it in my life. I could study everything about neuroscience, psychology, help others, but whenever I was most under stressed, whenever I was most activated, all that knowledge would go out out of my head, out the window, if you will. And I basically forgot what I was supposed to do. And so, as you just said, CRATE stands for clarity, which is the clarity to discern what is going on, the ability to orient in the moment And often the one of the paths to find clarity is to actually orient toward constraints, to look at, okay, what door just shut? What is it that I don't want to notice? Because usually when we're not noticing, it's not accidental, it's because we're ignoring something, we're trying to run away from something that is happening. So clarity begins with constraint. It begins with knowing, orienting toward what it is that you don't want to know. And then often that activates the fear response, and this is why regulation comes next. And regulation has to do with both relating to what is happening, basically going, okay, where has this happened before? Where is there's the recognition of both where have I had this story in my head before, or where have I had this relational pattern with another human or with another, something didn't go right in a business meeting and I feel activated and overwhelmed. Where has that happened before? And through regulating, we down regulate. We can begin to actually relate to what's going on rather than travel in the future or in the past and start second guessing. And then once we are down regulated somewhat, we're not in this extreme stress response, we can get to some level of agency. And so I mentioned constraint before. I think the selling point of orienting toward constraints is that as soon as you see the constraints, you begin to also see affordances. You can see they're like a yin yang, they dance together. The moment when you see what is not possible and you can bravely, because sometimes it requires courage, actually note and orient toward it, you open up a wedge of opportunity. So that Viktor Frankl quote, between stimulus and response, there is a space. That's what we're trying to do. I didn't invent any of this. Wisdom traditions, philosophy, psychology, everybody points at this opening of space toward between stimulus and response so that we can figure out where our agency is. And the moment we have agency, or the moment we can even see the affordance of what to step into, we begin to, first of all, the overwhelm subsides because now you are, to use Brene Brown's terms, the agent in the arena. You actually shift forward, you step in, you're no longer cowering. And then you can enact something. And the question is, of course, how to orient toward those affordances. Now, the reason why trust comes after that, so it goes clarity, regulation, agency, trust, is that very often we know what we can do, but we don't take it on, we don't step forward, we don't act, because very often we believe that we will fail. So trust is both the relational trust, the sense of feeling secure and safe enough, the psychological trust of, okay, I can dare, and if I dare greatly, even if I fall flat on my face, I can survive. But it's also the internal trust, the trust in self, which is about the resilience, the ability to persevere regardless of what happens. And trust begins temporally. Trust begins with orienting in time and pinning yourself back to, I mentioned traveling in the future, traveling back in the past. Trust is all about temporally coming in this moment and saying, okay, am I seriously under as much threat as I think in the moment? And usually the answer is no, because if you seriously were as much under as much threat, you wouldn't be asking yourself that question. You'd be running. Like nobody sits there and gets anxious if a bear is chasing them. We just run. And so usually when we're spinning up and lacking trust, it is temporally we're okay enough, or we're at least relatively safe and we can orient. It's the future or the past that we're defending against. And then once you have a certain level of grounded embodied trust, what it comes down to is the energetic container, the physical, meaning like metabolic. Do you have the resources to actually do what you need to do? And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes it is like, no, you need to rest, you need to sleep, you need to eat. And that's very real. We live in a physical universe where physical energy matters. But beyond that, there is also a relational energy. So we get ideas and inspiration and comfort from each other. And so that relational energy is really, really important. And I think that there's also another level of energy, which is the creative spiritual energy, which is the attunement to things larger than yourself, whether that's creativity, ideas, the things we're building in the world, or sometimes it's family, or sometimes it's belief practices. And that also can give us energy even when our physical energy is depleted. And so crate is intended not as a linear path, but actually as a circle. And by the time you orient toward your energy, you get greater clarity, and that gives you greater regulation. That gives you more agency, that gives you more trust, that gives you more energy. And so if you embody it, if you learn how to use it, it becomes a virtuous cycle, which helps you orient, especially when things are overwhelming.
Very insightful. Daisy, you suggest that our greatest source of stress can also be a deep well of creativity. How can individuals shift their perspective to harness stress as a creative force rather than limiting ones?
Yeah. I have to be careful here because there is always opportunity in high risk situations. And at the same time, sometimes very highly volatile situations are just that. So I am always careful to say there is no panacea, there is no silver lining. It's not that like everything bad, like a pandemic, has a good thing, because sometimes there is no good part. Sometimes you just have to survive through something. And, there is still a learning, there is still resilience you can build, and that embedded trust that you can build. Um, but in situations that are not cataclysmic, that are not a matter of a huge pandemic or markets falling or geopolitical wars, in regular everyday situations, usually the stress, the tension that we can withstand actually opens up, first of all, adrenally, it activates us and it opens up opportunities for greater insight. And more importantly, I think it pushes us to orient toward the things that we fear. And if we do our work, if we do our inner work, and we do part of what I am hoping people orient toward, which is basically do what scares you, move toward the scary thing, not away from it, it opens up possibilities. It basically gives us the courage to care, the meaning to actually act, and the resilience to create. And that's actually why courage, meaning, and resilience are part of the subtitle, because I think we need those parts in order to actually be aligned and thrive.
In moments of uncertainty, many of us instinctively try to seek control. How can we reframe our relationship with the unknown and develop a more adaptive approach?
Huh. Um, the unknown is unknown for a reason. I mean, the very premise of uncertainty, the unknown, is that those are the things we do not know. And so the crate framework is not just the five dimensions. Each dimension also has three aspects. They're based on 4E cognitive science. Um, and the path of how we work through the framework always orients toward a certain level of acceptance, relational integration, um, even allowance, a welcoming of uncertainty. And so to answer it as shortly and succinctly as I can, the way we work with uncertainty is to accept it. The way we work with uncertainty is to not try to change it into certainty and control it. And this is where all of us, myself included, often fall short, because we're like, yeah, I get it. So let me use the framework so that I can make things certain and clear. And the answer is no. There are many things that will never be fully certain, that will never be fully known to us. It is a process. And so the way we work with uncertainty is to actually welcome it, which is a tall order. And it's a continuous process.
Your book speaks to leaders who want to create psychological safety in their teams. What are some of the key strategies for fostering an environment where intensity is embraced rather than feared?
Um, I think the best way is to actually model it. This is true for leadership, it's true for parenting, it's true for humaning. If we as leaders, parents, humans, partners, all of it, walk into every room willing to orient toward uncertainty and welcome it, willing to say the soft thing out loud, willing to admit when we are uncertain, when we are scared, vulnerable, all of those things, and understand that that does not make us weak, that actually makes us both stronger and more courageous, but also it gives permission to those around us, those who are orienting to us for the leadership to know what is going on, gives everyone else permission to be vulnerable themselves. And in that vulnerability, there's both tremendous courage because people, and I encounter this very often when I work with teams that behave like they have everything figured out are scared. I don't know if I can swear, so I'll err on the side of not swearing, but they're everything in them is extremely just protected. It is only when we say only when we open up the delta between what we know and what we don't know, and we say that to each other, that we can build trust, which is the very essence of psychological safety. And we also earn trust.
You argue that we shouldn't try to bypass or eliminate intense emotions, but instead welcome them as portals to deeper understanding. How can we develop the emotional intelligence to navigate these experiences effectively?
Um, So this too comes with the same caveat I had before around overwhelm, meaning sometimes when the overwhelm is real and the threat is really, really heightened, the negative emotions have to wait. Meaning sometimes you can't sit there and process all of your grief because you have to run or you have to cope or you have to help somebody. The trick here is that very often that short-term sublimation that we do with negative emotions um, becomes long-term. We just sublimate them, we put them in a box, we tamp them down, we say, I will deal with this later, and then we never do. And so I think the biggest issue really is to make space and give ourselves the back to psychological comfort, to lead ourselves internally and comfort ourselves internally, to be able to have the space to process the negative emotions or they're not negative, the things we label as negative emotions, but the negatively valenced ones, the scary ones, the things we don't want to feel. Um, and this is why therapy, coaching, close friendships are so incredibly beneficial because someone can hold space while we work through that, while we feel all the way through. And on the other end of each one of those emotions, there's usually really important knowledge to be found. So the reason we get angry is because our boundaries get crossed. And so feeling anger all the way through orients us toward what matters most to us, what we need to protect the most, what we fear to lose, and then we can protect it. We can work on that. Similarly with grief. Grief shows us what we love. If we didn't love it, if we didn't care deeply, it wouldn't matter whether we lost it. And so every emotion is basically a messenger, and I don't mean that in a metaphorical way. I just mean our nervous system is actually sending us messages to orient toward things and away from other things.
Daisy, for someone listening today who feels overwhelmed, what is one actionable step they can take right now to start shifting from overwhelm to flow?
So the first step, which I wish someone had, well, people did tell me, it took me a while to actually hear it, was that you can solve the head with the head, meaning we cannot try to just think our way out of problems. And particularly the more for people who are in business, professionals, we are often used to solving everything with our minds, but our minds get trapped in these, they're like hamsters. They get trapped spinning and continuously imagining worst case scenarios. And so one of the best ways to still your nervous system is going back to regulation, is the relational practices, the ability to relate to another human, or animals are actually fantastic for down regulating. So any kind of pet, or even going outside and looking at some birds. Similarly, nature in general, greenery is very adaptive for our nervous system. It actually calms us down. And so just going outside and looking at some light and looking at some trees, some just anything green, um, really begins to downregulate us. And sometimes it is important to, similarly with breath work, and I know probably many of your listeners have some version of breath work or exercise or something like that. The objective is to still yourself, to calm down sufficiently so that you can then engage with the clarity part, the agency part, and then you can do the cognitive parts as well.
This is my last question. You explore how personal transformation has ripple effects beyond the individual. Can you share an example of how embracing this approach has strengthened relationships, teams, or communities?
Um, I mean, the most obvious one is parenting. You didn't ask about families, but I think it always starts on the inside, and then it starts at home. And Carl Jung has, my favorite Jung quote is that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. And I think that that actually matters not just for those of us who are parents, but in leadership, in humaning in general. Um, if we work through our own internal integration of the cognitive and the emotional, and we reach an internal sense of coherence, then how we relate externally to others actually shifts. And in doing that, back to what we talked about in terms of psychological safety, we model a particular way of being that gives other permission, encouragement, inspiration to also relate differently. And with children, it's very starkly obvious because you can see how the way we parent is the way that they grow up to a great extent. But in leadership, that happens as well, and even in community, in terms of how we relate to our neighbors, how we relate to people, even just going to the store, what is on our faces, how we make eye contact or not, whether we smile or not, all of that has mirror effects in how others receive us, but also what they then take to the next person.
Listeners, as we wrap up today's insightful conversation with Dessy Levinson, I want to extend my deepest gratitude for her time and wisdom. Her work, rooted in neuroscience, psychology, and years of real world experience, offers a powerful reframe of how we navigate complexity, uncertainty, and emotional intensity. Daisy, thank you for sharing your insights and for encouraging us to embrace transformation rather than resist it. Thank you so much for joining with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deepak. I really appreciate your time as well.
Thank you.